Okay, cool. We are live on LinkedIn. Today I'm joined by Gen Furukawa, who is the co-founder of Prehook, who make interactive quizzes for Shopify stores. Gen, welcome. Why don't you give us a background, how you got started, what's your story in e-commerce to date?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Adam, for having me. So I realized I started in e-commerce about 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago. I was interning for Bucket Feet, which is an early DTC brand, custom footwear. So I actually recorded a podcast with the co-founder of Bucket Feet, who I interned for. But since then, that was kind of like a very different DTC e-commerce playbook or marketing game than it is today. And since then, I've had time in kind of like the investor role at a private equity firm that invested in various e-commerce brands, skateboard brand, skincare brand, other car parts brands. So that was a little bit of like the investor and brand side. And then it moved over to the SaaS tool side. So it's leading the marketing team at Jungle Scout, which is a leading Amazon product research tool. Helps people find products to sell on Amazon and scale their business on Amazon. So I was doing that for about 3.5, a little less than 4 years, which was a fantastic experience. Amazon has grown and become an integral channel, obviously, for many e-commerce brands. And since then, actually, I've started a SaaS tool for Shopify merchants with a couple of my friends from Jungle Scout, and it's Prehook. And it's a quiz builder for Shopify merchants. The goal is to help merchants learn a little bit more about what their customers are looking for, get this information that's integral to the segmentation on the back end, and then what offers, campaigns, messages they're sending to their customers, and from their recommended products. So in some sense, trying to replicate this in-person shopping experience for online stores.
Amazing. And how come you decided to go into, because it's becoming quite a competitive space already. You've got people like Octane AI. I know there's a few others as well.
Yeah.
Made you see an opportunity here?
Totally. Yeah. So actually, when we started building it, it was maybe May 2020, and there weren't actually the tools like Octane AI or Jebbit, some of these larger companies that have since released a quiz builder. So yeah, that wasn't part of the landscape when we started. But I think it just validates the need that merchants are trying to understand more about what their customers are looking for, have this back and forth or conversational element, and then guide them to the most relevant product as soon as possible. And also, mind you, I mean, this was before, this iOS 14 or, third-party cookies being deprecated. So it's harder and harder for brands to understand what their customers' demographics are or their interest buying behaviors. So targeting some of these traditional channels of acquisition, like advertising, are becoming more expensive or harder to leverage in terms of reaching the right people with the right message. So this notion of getting customer data, like people call it zero-party data that your shoppers are willingly and proactively sharing with you, is becoming more and more important in marketing strategy.
Absolutely, completely agree. Got a couple of listeners here. Hi, Gan, not Adam. I'm pretty sure that's Juliana. Not sure why.
Hey, Juliana, how are you doing?
I want to say hello.
She's always on LinkedIn. I love it. The lifetime value lady.
Robert as well. Cool. Let's dive straight into some questions then related to the quizzes.
Yeah.
So I'm jumping ahead of myself there. So what are the fundamentals of a strong quiz that adds to the customer experience, like you mentioned before?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really just about like adding value and providing the right incentive or hook for a shopper to take the quiz. Like I think we've all experienced this with, say, display ads or email opt-ins, that it's, what Andrew Chen calls the law of shitty click-throughs. There's a novelty at first, and then it'll just plummet. This, like, the novelty wears off. And then if there is no incentive or value in exchange for providing an email or clicking on an ad, there's a far lower chance of going through and doing so. And I think the same exact thing applies to a quiz. There's no hesitation to drop in an email if you're getting something of value in return. So I recently was doing a lot of research on Heidi Zak, who's a co-founder and CEO of Third Love. And she has the same premise that in order to receive the data of your customers, you really have to offer value up front. And for them, for example, it's really important because the data has become an engine for the product development and the marketing and how they're positioning the Third Love brand. So they have this fit finder quiz. And if I'm a customer, the challenge of finding the right fit, especially online, is super important. If you're, say, selling fragrance online, understanding what the nuance of the different fragrances are. It's very hard to understand if you're behind a screen and you can't smell the product or feel it. And that's where the value comes. So to get back to your question, like how do you add value or how do you make it a good customer experience? I think if you're adding value to the experience, then that's the most important thing. And it doesn't necessarily need to be what the recommendation is or what the right fit is. I think you can, like, a quiz by nature is about education and engagement, which is two of the core components of just creating a generally like good user experience. So you can use the quiz to like kind of educate the customer on the problem that they're having or on the brand itself, the solution that you're offering, and that's value. And so I think if you keep that in mind, like somehow adding value to the whole experience, you'll get better engagement and more people actually starting and finishing the quiz.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that in a second and talk about specific use cases. But the Third Love one is very interesting. Like you said, I remember reading about how they leverage the quizzes in, I think it's $1 Billion Brand Story. I don't know if you've read that book.
No.
Yeah, but like you said, basically, I seen how it's been fundamental to their overall business and growing it to date. So yeah, super interesting. So with that being said, is there any specific brands or industries the quizzes may be tailor-made for, and any ones that you don't think they might apply as well?
Yeah, so I think if you go to a lot of skincare brands, say, or food and beverage brands, fit finders, whether it is like a lingerie or clothing, like those are very commonly used. And I think the challenge there that the brands are using, like cosmetics, is it's hard. There are so many different variations to pair with their inventory. So if you think about like a foundation finder to find the right skin tone, like that's something that traditionally you would go in person, to a Sephora, you dab it on your skin and say like, all right, this is the exact tone that I need. And so that's hard to do just by looking at a screen and understanding what the right product is. So what types of industries? I think a quiz is applicable to lots of brands, whether it is skincare, food and beverage, clothing, whatever. But if you think about like what the interaction might be, if it was an in-person retail associate speaking with a customer, like the quiz is essentially a stand-in for that, but at scale. Yes. So I don't think that there's quizzes that are a quiz like wouldn't make sense for different brands, but it's just how you're actually using it. Because, what product, for example, would sell itself without any interaction with a human? Not many. I think like as customers, we always have questions, or we always might want some guidance from the brand that we're purchasing from.
Absolutely. That's quite interesting because in that sense, the quiz can replicate the in-person experience in retail as well and take it online. Totally.
Like if you think about going to a store, the person, if it's a good sales associate, they might ask, what problems are you currently experiencing? Like, what's your starting point? What's your goal? Yeah. So what's your end point? And then from there, they're able to make some quick calculations of their own inventory, their own products, and how that product could be the bridge to get you, the customer, from where you're at to where you want to go, and kind of like fulfill this aspirational end. So yeah, thinking about a quiz in terms of what the retail experience is, the in-person conversation, I think is a helpful way of how you could use a quiz.
Let me ask you, actually, because you're collecting so much data, do you think that puts a lot of pressure on the brands to really deliver a great experience, because they're willingly providing you with a lot of insights, quite personal about themselves? So do you think there's a lot of pressure on the brand to create a great experience from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what would the failure of creating the experience, a poor experience, look like? Maybe the person doesn't buy or they unsubscribe. So maybe, but there's an interesting study, and I forget who did it. It might have been Accenture, but it's basically about this customer experience gap that we as consumers, and I definitely feel this too, do not want to be spoken to as a number or receive generic email blasts. We want very targeted, relevant messages. And the flip side is we're actually willing to share the data. I think it's maybe like 80% are willing to share personal data in order to receive a better experience. But the challenge here, the rub where there's an opportunity for marketers, is that marketers are actually having a very big problem delivering on that experience. So that's what's called a customer experience gap, that we want personalization and we're willing to give whatever you need as a marketer to get that, but we're just not receiving it. So yeah, there is definitely some pressure perhaps, but I think it's more of an opportunity that you can ask whatever you want, and many people would be willing to share it with the expectation that you're going to act on it and provide a relevant experience.
That's a very good point. And I think possibly we've all been guilty of falling into the trap of, because we've just offered 10% off for an email address, people have become very lazy and focused on that initial conversion, when actually, if you enrich the profiles and find more data out about the customer, then the lifetime value and potential to retarget that person and serve them better is going to be a lot higher than just focusing on primarily on that initial conversion.
Yeah. And if you think all right, we all value 10%, that's important, but then specifically, what else can color that email in the in your backend CRM, and just a few simple questions of what is it that you're looking for, or if it's for example a jewelry brand, what type of jewelry are you looking for, or maybe what your price point is, or what your current view is on colors. There are a variety of things that you could ask in a very quick way, just say 1 minute, get a lot of details that would help inform a relevant marketing experience thereafter. And so therefore, I think you're able to stretch that 10% discount into a lot more in terms of an impactful marketing campaign.
100% agree with you. Let's go on to segmentation then, because if you're collecting all that data up front, is there any use cases on how that can then filter through to the CRM, like you've just touched on, and provide a better experience for the customer? How would you approach this?
Yeah, so I think that there are so many ways. I mean, you could segment literally in infinite number of ways. The first maybe that makes the most sense might be on this stage of their customer journey. So that might be are they just learning about the problem? And so some quizzes, I think Helix or Trade Coffee, for example, they might, or there's a dog food brand, Farmer's Dog. It's do you believe that organic food is necessary for your dog, or are you skeptical, or do you not have an opinion? And so that's kind of their way, their proxy of saying where are you in the funnel? Do you need to understand the whole problem at a high level, or are you convinced of that and we can get down to the nitty gritty of our product versus a competitor's product? So that's kind of the stage in the customer journey, starting from the problem itself all the way down to the bottom of the funnel, our product versus another product. Another is what challenge are you experiencing? And you might see this a lot with skincare brands. So first it might be what your starting point is. Are you, say, dry, normal, oily skin? And then what are the problems that you're having? Is it acne, rosacea, or dark spots, whatever? And then so sharing very specific problems and then the solutions thereafter, and then the recommended product that would help with the problems. So I think the problems and then maybe the end goals is also another helpful way to segment, based on bone broth, for example, what their end goal is. Is it gut health, or is it energy, or is it focus? And so that might help inform what their automation might look like.
Definitely. And just to get a bit deeper into that, you can possibly have so many different permutations on welcome flows, and even obviously product recommendations being the main one. But I'm just thinking, if someone gives you that data, then they could each have a unique welcome flow, like you said, to take the skincare example, someone who has blemishes compared to someone who has dry skin. Each person can be funneled into a different path that's a lot more targeted to them. And then segment them naturally in the accounts so that you can speak to them a lot better. And really ironic, actually, that you talk about the farmer's dog and skincare. We've worked with a couple of brands recently, exactly the same examples. And I was amazed how much data that have came from the quizzes, and just looking at all the opportunities that you have to segment them and provides better experience. It's so much more effective compared to, standard email address, where ultimately you're just guessing a lot when it comes through to you, unless you progressively profile them after. But as we know, that's not as effective.
Yeah. The farmer's dog, I don't know how they do it, because, even for example, you're just talking about the number of breeds that they have. They have a drop down. It must be like 50 different breeds. And you're talking like what the health of the dog is, in terms of like weight or age or problems that they're having. I mean, it's really impressive, almost to the point where, for example, another brand, Skinsay, which is a Unilever subsidiary, skinsay.com, and they have a really great quiz. It's a holistic quiz. It asks about maybe like 7 different types of factors that are impacting your skin, whether it's, the locations, which has to do with the sunlight and the amount of UV, or your hydration habits, or your stress, your exercise, all these things that combine to create, I think they call it like a bioprint. And from there, so there are, over 1 million different results, but they have maybe, like a handful of products. And from the bioprint, they're creating this different array of skincare regimens, which is, it's not like they're creating the skincare product itself for you based on your quiz, but they're creating the different routine based on your quiz results. So in that sense, it is a personalized skincare product, even though the product itself, it's maybe they have 20 different products, but it's the combination and permutations of the skincare regimen that's personalized. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, like you said, there's so much data flowing through. I suppose it could be quite overwhelming. So maybe to identify the core cohorts that you can target and tailor an experience to would be important.
Yeah, I mean, like, what did you do with the skincare brand, or I'm sorry, the dog brand?
Yeah, so essentially there was a couple of things. We identified that anxiety and hip mobility were a big problem for a lot of the dogs. So then we created separate flows if they didn't purchase for those people based on the recommendations. There was so much data. We sort of identified them as two of like the top quick wins. But yeah, it was the granularity that you could have got down to, all to the point of breed, type of issue that the dog is specifically having. Like, it's incredible. Realistically, you could have 500 different flows that are triggered by that, but obviously there's a time element involved as well.
Yeah, the diminishing returns on getting is super granular. But yeah, My Pet Fin, I don't know if you know that one, but that's very similar. It's a CBD brand for dogs, and they have a nice quiz, very similar to what you're describing.
This brings us nicely on to the next one, actually, because I love quizzes, and I don't personally think this, but I have heard a couple of people recently mention that we might be a quiz fatigue. Do you think that's a worry for e-commerce brands?
Yeah. I think it's like, again, it goes back to like the value that you're adding. I mean, are we experiencing content fatigue or Zoom fatigue or Twitter fatigue? Like, yeah, but if there's enough value, and so it reminds me of a quote that I read, like, it's not a matter of attention span, because you can easily spend 2 hours in front of Netflix watching. And so but you're being entertained or you're being educated, and you're down for that. You're happy to do it. But if it's like 2 hours of droning on of something that's just not interesting, like, no, you're not going to spend the time doing it. So it's about how engaging, how valuable, how interesting it is. And I think also, there is something to the point that attention spans are shorter. So you really want to pack in a lot of value. I think, I sometimes see questions like, if you were a season, what type of season would you be? Or, what's your spirit animal? These things are like so fluffy, and they don't really add value, or it's like, it's hard to like, maybe you go to BuzzFeed for an entertaining quiz like that. But if you're a brand, you're trying to get as much value out of every question. So I think probably holding back on stuff like that, and then just getting almost more clinical. Of course, being on brand, but you want to make sure that every question will impact what you're doing in terms of your follow-up flows or the segmentations, your remarketing campaigns, that kind of stuff.
No throwaway questions. So make sure if you include it, you're going to do something productive with it and it serves a purpose.
Totally. And as you might imagine, like I saw something recently, Typeform probably has the largest aggregation of data on this. And there's, as you might imagine, a diminishing curve for every question that you ask. And I forget exactly what it is. I'll have to find it for you. But yeah, for every question, you're like, all right, is a trade-off of less completions worth adding this extra question? But I did see, Typeform as a whole, and this was a few years ago, they have a completion rate of like 57% or something. And it's about the same desktop and mobile. So I've heard a little bit higher in terms of quiz completion rate. But when you're getting towards some of the meat and the potatoes, the most important part of like the email opt-in or the recommendation, like that's where you're seeing the uptick in engagement. So you might see more emails if somebody goes through a flow as opposed to if they see a pop-up. Pop-up might be like 5-10%, generously. A quiz would be far higher if they're in a quiz and that quiz is engaging and there's something of value or interest on the other end of that email opt-in.
Yeah, that's super interesting, actually. Out of curiosity, and we'll talk about benchmarks on quizzes in a second, do you have any recommendations for open-ended questions compared to multi-choice?
Yeah, like to be frank, I don't. I think structured data that you can manipulate, understand, analyze is far easier. But I think maybe, from a customer research perspective, open-ended questions are good. It just takes time to gather it. And then I think it also depends on like what your end goal is. Like, for example, I was speaking with a jewelry entrepreneur. And so she does video calls. Her name is Prehook and her brand is Daria Day. And it's awesome. And she's getting so much value out of these calls. They're not necessarily as scalable because she's the founder and it's her brand. And so to jump on a 15-minute call is very costly in terms of time, but the output that she gets from it is invaluable. And the same can be said in some sense of reading text. It's not, you can't kind of like manipulate it to understand what the trends are, but you can read it, pull out insights. And so, like, for example, getting back to Heidi Zach and Third Love, like that's how they actually like identify this gap in the market in terms of half cup sizes. And up until that point, that was not a thing, but customers kept on asking for it. They identified that there was a gap and there was an opportunity. They started making it. And now they have over 80 SKUs and differentiating based on offering the most comfortable product, the best fit. So, maybe use it. Again, I think getting back to the completion, maybe you want to capture the email first and then ask that. Of course, it's something that you'd want to test, but I don't know. Sometimes it's hard from the quiz taker or the consumer perspective to like type out something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is worthwhile, I think, to go through those answers to the quizzes and the surveys because there's so much valuable insights in there. And ultimately, if you just focused on what serves you the best in the quickest time, then you can miss those key insights. And I like that because it feeds back and can help with product development, the analytics, the research, and it's not solely focused on conversion. You're actually helping like every stage of the brand and the funnel in that.
Yeah. And also like one, maybe like halfway point might be doing something, like it might be a multiple choice of like for the dog example, like what problems are you having? Anxiety, hip pain, other, and then you just have like an open text. And so that way, like maybe you haven't included every single potential problem and customers over time might help you notice that there's another option that you didn't include in your multiple choice.
Definitely. Cool stuff. So just to go a little bit deeper on the benchmarks, is there any recommendations? And I know this is heavily individualistic based on the brand, what you're trying to find out, but have you noticed any benchmarks in terms of fall off, like you mentioned before?
I have not. And so to be frank, we're early, we have a live product and we have customers using it, but I don't think we have enough data on hand in order to get verifiable benchmarks. But from my own experience, probably I don't want to spend more than a couple minutes on doing a quiz. So, that's just one data point, take it for what it's worth. But like I spend a lot of time taking the quizzes just for fun. And if I find that I'm like getting questions that are kind of like not I don't find value and I don't see how it would be valuable in my own experience with a brand down the line, I might just close out. It's very easy to close out and not continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. So let's talk a bit about some of the brands that you've worked with so far. Again, like what type of results are you noticing and who have you worked with, if you don't mind saying?
Yeah, sure. So some of the brands, like we're a few weeks into having a live app. And so one brand, for example, is Selfmaker, SLFMKR. And she's actually an interesting use case because it's a retail outlet in like the Cleveland area, but then she's moving more online. So all of a sudden, like as you might imagine in a pandemic, in-person like foot traffic drops, so there's more of a shift towards an e-commerce focus. And she also has a large array in terms of like skincare or hair care or kind of like general health and wellness. So the quiz has been important to help her like capture leads and then kind of get people to the right product. And in terms of output and kind of like lift, we haven't seen enough yet in order to say like, hey, this is where, this is exactly what you should do, because we have thousands of people and thousands of data points. But maybe I can use other examples because I've, done a lot of research on where there are opportunities and where people are doing good things or interesting things with it. We're still early in terms of customers and data to have like huge success stories. But some of the metrics that we're looking at are email leads. Are we getting more emails if they take a quiz versus if they just see a static pop-up? Yeah. And then on-site conversion rate. Do they click on a product and then purchase? So, in Google Analytics, for example, segment those that have taken the quiz and those have not. Do those that take the quiz convert at a better rate? Do they have a higher average order value? Do they have a higher lifetime value because you know what they're looking for, and therefore you can kind of like have post-purchase follow-ups specific to their needs? So these are the types of things we're looking for. And to be frank, I think we're too early to like, come on your show and say like, yeah, we're doing it. But I think that we're heading in that direction for sure.
Cool. It's I can't wait to see some more of the data, like you said, because for me, it makes more sense to put the effort into understanding the customer and getting to know more about them as opposed to solely being focused on the conversion, because it's just a plethora of information and opportunity that you can leverage that data for further down the line. So I'm excited. Yeah.
I mean, can I ask you, like, what you mentioned the dog brand, but some other examples that you've had of seeing it before and after with a quiz?
So it's still relatively new to us. We've only worked with 2 brands as well on the quiz. From our perspective, I mean, there's so much different flows and opportunities that I'm seeing inside the account to actually reduce the dependency on campaigns, because you don't have to retarget someone as much with campaigns, I find, if you set up automation based on the data that you already have. So as an example, let's say a dog comes through with health and longevity needs. You can set up a flow 60 days afterwards if they make an order and haven't repurchased, to then go in with sort of a tailored offering to them. You don't have to necessarily keep creating those manual campaigns to retarget people. So I think just taking a look at the quick wins with the data, that you can put some automation in place and then retarget people into the future, will alleviate a lot of pressure on the brand. Because you're not having to just guess as much with campaigns and just do that batch and blast approach. So that's like how we're trying to look at it. And then obviously when you do come to send campaigns with people, because like you said, you might know someone's skincare preferences, whether it's blemishes, acne, dry skin, you can send less campaigns to people because you're not guessing on which product they're like. and you just provide a lot more purposeful content that's relevant to them. So I think it will allow you to send less messages, but more concise ones that the customer actually appreciates. At least that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it kind of gets towards also the subscription business, where I've seen like quizzes are really helpful. Like, for example, like Scentbird is monthly fragrance, or Stitch Fix, which is monthly clothes, or Wink, which is wine. So there are these recurring products, and part of it is like every product needs to be on point and helpful. Otherwise, you're going to see churn rates. So there's a direct correlation of retention to, I guess, you're understanding your customers' preferences. And so each of those brands use a quiz, and I think that they're using it very effectively and almost as a competitive advantage to make sure that they're getting the right product to the right customers.
Yep, and likewise, the dog subscription brand, the personalized dog nutrition brand is a subscription brand as well, and that's exactly how they're using it. So, yeah, great stuff. Again, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to add on quizzes whilst we're here?
No, I mean, like I said, we are building the product. We're able to capture emails, integrate with Klaviyo, and recommended products. So it's a really great. I'm really excited about where we're going and the pace with which we're developing it. So if you're interested at all in testing it out, I'd be happy to build out a quiz for you, and you can just basically install it on your store to test for free. We have a free forever plan. So just hit me up. My email is Gen, Gen @prehook.com. Would love to help you out.
Perfect. And on that note, we will end it there. Thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate
Adam, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yes.